MacArthur Memorial is home to the collection of Colonel Clyde Childress. Now, during World War II, Childress was one of the guerrilla leaders in the Philippines on the island of Mindanao. Today we're going to take you behind the scenes in the MacArthur Archives and share his incredible story with you.
Today we're going to talk about someone asked a question about. If you saw the Charlie Smith Compass video that we did, this was a picture that we held up. And somebody asked about this person right here, very rough and ready looking fellow. And they've opened a can of worms because this is Clyde Childress. And Clyde Childress was the last surviving infantry officer of the 31st Infantry Regiment. This was the famous regiment that was in the Philippines when the war began, All-American Regiment, destroyed on Bataan. Clyde Childress was a member of that regiment. He had joined the Army in 1940 and came to the Philippines in April of that same year. And then was there when July of 41 when the United States Army Forces Far East Command was reactivated. And then General MacArthur used all those officers from the 31st Infantry Regiment to train all those Filipinos on all the different islands. And so Clyde Childress was removed from that 31st Infantry, and he was sent down from Luzon to the island of Panay, where they started training the 61st Infantry of the Filipino Army. Then in November, they moved down to Negros, and there they started training again. That's when the war started. As soon as December 7th happened, that 61st Infantry then got transported down to Mindanao. And that is where they're going to face the Japanese in May of 1942. Now, the 31st Infantry was the old Polar Bear Regiment because they had been in Siberia at the end of World War I. Then they got shifted down to Shanghai in China and then brought over to the Philippines, which is where they were when the war began. Housed in the Cuartel de España in Intramuros, the old Spanish section of Manila, and there they were pretty much the show regiment that was really the standard force of the Americans there. They were part of this Philippine division made up of Philippine scouts, but they were the only really all-American unit there. Now, when Clyde gets shifted down to Negros, he hooks up with a bunch of other officers. Now, these are officers from the 31st Infantry Regiment. These are officers from the 45th Philippine Scouts, officers from the 57th Philippine Scouts, and these will all become the officers that train these Filipino forces there on Panay and Negros. Now, this is a very interesting picture because this is Clyde Childress with all his fellow officers. Now, only Clyde Childress, who is right here, and then Ernest McClish over here. These are battalion commanders for that 61st Infantry. They're the only ones that are going to survive the war. Everybody else at this table dies as a prisoner of war. Both Childress and McClish, after surrender, would become guerrilla commanders. Now, when the 61st Infantry got transported down to Mindanao, they came right here, down right below Lake Lanao. And they were defending the coast here, right around Malabang, because this is a very easy access beach, and that's exactly where the Japanese came in. And then they were going to be heading up here to Lake Lanao, because Dansalan was one of the main areas that the Americans had right here. It's where the forces were really, headquarters were. 61st Infantry tries to hold here. They're trying to hold the Ganassi Road that came up. The Japanese came up through on May 1st. And immediately it was overrun. 3rd Battalion of McClish was overrun. Clyde Childress with the 2nd Battalion tried to do a flank attack, but they got totally destroyed by the Japanese. One of Clyde's best friends, Sammy Fort, was one of the executive officers of the 61st Infantry. He gets killed in this battle here. Eugene Mitchell, he had been an officer that had been sent out from the United States just before the war and took command of that 61st Infantry, and he as well will get captured. This is a very famous picture right here. Now, Clyde Childress, cut off from the rest of his forces because the Japanese moved right past his battalion heading up to Lake Lanao right here, and then he will get caught up in a maelstrom of Filipino as well as his own troops trying to move up into the Cebuano barracks area, which is up around here, up around the pinch between Panguil and then Pagadian Bay. That's when they find out about the surrender. Everybody, the rest of the people on Lanao are going to go into captivity. But a lot of these guys are going to evade capture, and they are going to go hide out in the jungle. And that's what Clyde Childress makes a decision to do. He finds an American mestizo. This is a half American, half Filipino, who owns a farm over in Sindangan, and he will come over here. Now, Clyde has malaria, typhus, every other kind of disease, and he's pretty much wiped out over here, just trying to get healed up as the months are going by. Finally, he finds out that a Filipino guerrilla is about to come disarm him. Clyde goes into the camp on his own and disarms this guy himself right in front of all of his own guerrillas. Clyde Childress is not a person that you want to be messing with. November of 1942, Clyde hears that a general, an American general, has landed here in Misamis Occidental. Now, this is Wendell Fertig. Fertig has come across from the Lanao area over into Misamis Occidental, and they have taken over this area and are using it as pretty much like a guerrilla kingdom. Clyde, at that point, makes a trek across the north coast of Zamboanga and Mindanao and makes it over into Misamis Occidental. And there he met the Osama sisters. Now, these are very well-connected family. They have a brother who is in the Philippine Senate up in Luzon still. And they take care of so many people that had not surrendered, evaded capture. And they get them all cleaned up and help them out. And Clyde, like a great many of them, just falls in love with the Osama sisters for the rest of their lives. Now, at Misamis, Clyde also meets Ernest McClish again, that battalion commander from the 61st Infantry. And they get in conference with Wendell Fertig. Now, Fertig is going to control the western half of Mindanao, and he gives them the credence to go over to Misamis Oriental, which is right across Iligan Bay, and that's where they're going to control that area. So Clyde Childress and Ernest McClish go over there and set up the 110th Division. They meet a lot of other Americans. These guys are like 1920. They are rough and ready, and they are out to basically control that whole area. They are going after all these disparate guerrilla groups, and they are then getting all the former U.S. Army weapons because they figure we are the U.S. Army here in Mindanao, and then they get those guerrillas to work for them. And so they're basically organizing all these people on Mindanao. Now, Clyde Childress, he will be somebody who ranges all throughout this Misamis Oriental, Agusan, and Surigao area, organizing all these guerrillas and then putting together, controlling the Agusan River, because this is where they start bringing in all the American submarines that are going to start resupplying everyone. Now, as the years go by from 1942 to 1944, Wendell Fertig has to keep moving out of this area because the Japanese invade. And then finally, in 1944, he'll end up down the Agusan River in this area called WWII. And that's where Clyde Childress is really working, protecting this area, as well as still bringing in these supplies by submarines. This is a very famous shot. Clyde's right at the front of the bow. This is Vicente Zabanta's Banca, the Athena. It had a 40mm Bofors attached to the front of the thing. Very much resourceful. And it's in March of 1944 that Clyde Childress will get the Silver Star. The Japanese had started pushing through Butuan, right down the Agusan River, and Khalil Kodurs, he was a Syrian merchant who became a guerrilla leader himself. He controlled the 113th Regiment, and they started meeting the Japanese as they were coming down the Agusan, right outside of Butuan, which is on the north coast of Mindanao. Clyde Childress went to find out what was going on, went alone down the river. And there he found out at this place called Vito's Hill, the Japanese had just kicked off Khalil Kodur's men that had this 40mm Bofors gun that controlled the Agusan River. Clyde got there to a promontory right next to it that also had a 37mm cannon. Clyde Childress manned this cannon by himself, drove the Japanese off that hill. Khalil Kodur's men were able to take it and drove the Japanese invasion coming down towards WWII and drove it back. Clyde Childress was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action for this action. Clyde Childress, in October of 1944, when the Americans go in Leyte, he leaves his guerrilla group, as many of them did, and make their way to Leyte, where they meet the American forces again, and then they will go off the island. There's a lot more to the story. Clyde had a lot to say about Wendell Fertig and the guerrilla movement on Mindanao. Basically, Wendell Fertig had written this book with John Keats called They Fought Alone, and Clyde, at the end of his life, wrote a book refuting most everything in the book. And Clyde was a straight shooter, and that's what everybody really thought of him. He was one of the charter members of the American Guerrillas of Mindanao, a section of all these Americans that stayed together all throughout the final years. In 2006, they had one of their last official meetings, and that's when they voted to send all these materials to the MacArthur Memorial, and that's why this all resides here. This is the final picture of Clyde. He died in 2007, but this was about 1998, and there he sits with Austin Schaffner, the Marine Corps major at the time who escaped from Davao Penal Colony in 1943. This is Clyde Childress's 1909 service revolver. Very nice piece that was donated by Clyde's wife, Dee Childress, after Clyde passed in 2007. Clyde carried this throughout the war. This is the pistol that he used to disarm the Philippine guerrilla that was about to come and grab it from him. This was the pistol that he carried throughout, as you see in that picture. Couldn't get any kind of ammo for this when Clyde was over there. And so he'd have to keep the shells, and Filipino craftsmen would make more bullets for him. Now the interesting thing about this is you have to send these things through gun stores to donate them to places. And it's a long process. And Dee Childress at the time was well into her 90s. And she got tired of the process. And so one day a box showed up and there was Clyde's pistol just stuffed in the box. And it arrived in perfect condition, and we're very glad about that. Clyde was a true friend of the MacArthur Memorial. He was a great friend of mine, and we miss him every day. He was a true